Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We took a little bit of a break over the summer. While people might have been on holidays or some version of that. We thought it was a good time to pause from our last event, I guess, at the beginning of July, and get back together here at the end of September. So this is the DesignOps Amsterdam meetup, and my name's Brendan. And I'm thrilled to have a couple of wonderful presenters here with us today. I hope them and everyone here is healthy and doing well and having a good kind of start or end of the third quarter and getting started to end off the year here. We've got a exciting couple of talks here, really kind of looking forward, I guess, a little bit into the design ops world and some of the things that we can look forward to as either practitioners of the craft or maybe collaborators with some of our colleagues and teams. Um, Myself, I've been keeping busy, I guess, over the summer, working in the design system space and particularly really thinking about quantifying some of the benefits or some of the great design systems that have been stood up and how do we think about money saved? How do we think about time and energy kept onto the team? And that brings me to the point that I would love to be speaking with some of you right now about some of your learnings and having that kind of collaboration. And that's one of the things that the online platform makes it harder to do than when we were getting together in Amsterdam. So while I'm happy to see people joining from really all over the world, it does have that downside. And so I wanted to throw up a quick poll to start us off and wondering how open people would be to collaborating in a virtual way. So there's some technology tools that I could use to pair people up, for instance, and you get to meet somebody and talk for a couple of minutes. I'm not sure if that's something that people would be interested in. So if it is, you can answer the poll here. I'll launch that out now. Keep it up for a couple of moments. Breakout rooms with Zoom is one option. Zoom doesn't have to be the tool that is used at all. As we all know, over the last couple of months, we've had all sorts of new tools pop up in the world that are trying to help us solve this problem a little bit better. Not sure they're going to deliver beer to us like we had at the meetups, but they'll at least let us chat and meet someone new. Well, fantastic. So I'm seeing that pretty substantially people are in favor of that. So what I'll commit to doing is before our next event, either finding a solution within Zoom or finding a new tool that we can use that allows us to get this outcome a little bit better. Perfect. Right, so why don't we head on to the speakers. As always, we're gonna have the first presentation and then a Q&A. So there's a button at the bottom of your screen marked Q&A with a couple of speech bubbles on it. If you click that, you can ask your question and I will make sure that those questions get asked to the speaker after their presentation while it's fresh in their minds. You can also use the chat function that's on the right-hand side of the screen after you've opened it on the bottom panel. And you can chat with the panelists directly after they're done speaking or with other attendees that are here today. So it's one way that we can communicate. So first up is Jamie Young. So Jamie, I'd ask if you could start sharing your screen. I'll give the briefest of introductions. Jamie's the Principal Group Design Manager at Microsoft in London, or just outside of London, I guess. Jamie's presentation's quite interesting. I think you're going to find the scaling challenges that he has at Microsoft to be fascinating and quite interesting how he's gone about. I was picking my words a little more carefully, Jamie. It's quite interesting how you've gone about to solving those. And of course, he's going to be talking a little bit about dev tools in the context of his presentation. So there's demos. Of course, there's demos in that context that will give us a bit of interactivity. So with that, Jamie, please take it away.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
great.
Yeah, not live demos. That's not a mistake I was prepared to make on the first time we talk about this. Hi everyone. My name's Jamie. I actually work for developer tools who are largely based, for Microsoft rather, who are largely based in Seattle. I'm a kind of anomaly in that regard. So I'm kind of remote to my team. But I want to take a few minutes to just kind of walk you through the way that we do design operations at DevDiv and kind of why we came to some of the conclusions that we did and some of the challenges and strategies that both we're faced with and some of the ways that we're trying to solve these things as well. So my title sounds sort of very lofty, but really the way I describe it when I talk to other people is I generally look after the design team all up. So the kind of principal group design manager is just something, a very Microsofty way of saying I'm head of design for dev tools. I'm going to try and see if this progresses. But I think that the kind of title that I talked to Brendan about, which is actually one of the more interesting insights, or the interesting insight for me anyway, when we started building a design operations team, was actually how it not only changed the way that we do the way that we work and the way that we operationalize design inside DevDiv, it also required us to change the way that the rest of the design team around us worked as well. And so that was kind of a push me, pull me, give and take sort of situation that was interesting, that emerged as we started to implement our kind of design operations strategies. To kind of do a bit of background, these are not screenshots of the products that we make. That's probably would have been more useful for people that don't know what our developer tools are. But my team is responsible for the world's most popular developer tools. So Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio Mac are the kind of the big desktop tooling IDEs, integrated developer environments. And we routinely every year amongst the developer audience are very, very popular. We design for, and the product teams that we work with build these products, and that's actually the Visual Studio for Mac group is kind of spread across Europe as well, so not all just West Coast specific. We're also heavily invested in the support of programming languages like .NET and Python, and we're very, very heavily involved in, as you probably everybody in Microsoft is, in some form of Azure. So we have a lot of work that goes on in the Azure service space as well. So a whole mixture of different design challenges when you think about what an operations team can bring. And we have another kind of, to kind of step back, actually, one of the interesting things and a good way of assessing kind of like how we look at, and the principle that we take when we are doing design ops is a quote that the manager of this team heard at a summit last year, I think, or maybe it was 2 years ago, which is the design ops is everything you do when you're not designing. And I kind of think that kind of kicked us off. When we attended that summit, that conference, we were right at the start of our kind of design operations journey. And I think that helped us sort of focus the way that we thought about what would be design ops and what wouldn't be. And it's a very simple way of framing it, but it's actually been a very kind of effective way of understanding for us, or it was a starting point for us understanding what would it be operationalized and what would just be feature or product design. So there's three parts to this kind of conversation, and the first part is really about why did we need to operationalize design? And we need to find a different word for operationalize, because it's quite hard to say when you're doing a presentation. But the operationalization of design is something that gets talked about a lot recently in the last few years, and everyone always talks about scale. Normally teams or presentations around these things have some form of kind of idea of ratio. And so to give you a sense of the way that it works inside developer tools or developer division inside Microsoft, we have a team of about 30 that report up to me, and only 16, about kind of half the team, a little over half the team, are what we would kind of class as product designers. Those designers are then required to work with 223 program managers, and I'm also required to work with 1,617 software engineers. So when you think about, when you kind of, none of these things are exact. There are people that are working on back-end tooling. There are people working on APIs that don't have any kind of interaction or feature or UI work involved. But very roughly, approximately speaking, there's kind of one product designer for 14 PMs for 101 engineers. So I think the kind of average best practice agency or Silicon Valley kind of thing is about kind of 1 designer to 4 engineers. So we're the kind of 1 designer to 101 engineers. So we do face quite a considerable scale challenge in all the work that we do. And really that manifests itself in a designer on our team, any designer, any of these 16 product designers on our team being very, very stretched. And so this is actually a screenshot of one of our senior product designers. And you can see, although I've hidden his name, it makes it look like it's mine. You can see just from that, his day, the kind of ability for him to find time to be that maker, that kind of like dedicated, focused maker for the product that he works on is very thin on the ground. I think, you can see on Monday, he's got a few hours that he can work on stuff. And then he's got like an hour and a half on Thursday afternoon. But arguably the rest of his day is filled with various kind of meetings, for want of a better, that's what they'll be, because we've all moved to online meetings, and that kind of like fills our calendars up even more. And so whenever I think about anything to do with operations, and kind of like my guiding principle often comes back to something like this, something around how in fact can we free up time for our team to actually spend time focusing, getting in flow states, being able to really craft user experiences that we're all proud of and keep us, leveled up near the top of the kind of developer tools market. And to kind of introduce another piece into the puzzle. So once we've got a very busy product designer, we also, and you'll all have variety of ways of working within the different organizations that you're part of. And this is our sort of our methodology for making product in DevDiv, and we call it the hypothesis progression framework. It has kind of 2 main big parts, which are the customer development part and the product development part. And I would say that for the longest time, and kind of pre the strategy that I'm about to talk about, we were, because of the scale issue that I've already covered as well, we were very much relegated to kind of essentially servicing, and as much as best we could. We were a phrase that gets thrown around a lot in my world is peanut buttered over the project. So we were very, very broad without the ability to go very deep on anything, very, very thinly spread, unless you like peanut butter, in which case, and really the kind of, there's 2 ends to this. So there's the idea of the customer end, where we're having direct engagement with the customer, and then there's the idea of the kind of the handoff to engineering, both of which, in my opinion, the operations team is kind of like uniquely positioned to help us. And so at one end, going back to that calendar again, any time that we can save for our interaction designers, any time that we can save for the product folks that work on our team, is time that they can spend with customers. And if you've ever, if you've ever watched user studies, usability studies, you've ever sat with a group of designers as they watch somebody trying to use something that they were convinced was, the perfect solution to a problem, you'll know the kind of gold that comes from actual kind of like customer face-to-face time. And so like whenever I'm thinking about this time aspect, it's about 2 things. It's about how can I free up time for the product designers to get close to the customer, like we call it zero distance to the customer. And so I gave the team, the product design team, the whole design team, this kind of this challenge for them to all get far closer. But to do that, we needed to free up their time in a way, and doing that was doing that through operationalization, the operations team. And at the other end, because of the kind of the talent that we have on the team and we could bring into the team, and because we're a tooling team as it is, we're a tooling design team, there was a great opportunity and an opportunity that I've never seen before in any teams that I've worked for in the past, but this kind of the technical background of the people I work with allows us to really dig into the engineering churn that we were also sort of struggling with. So the kind of idea of, I hate using the word handoff. I think a designer should follow a process all the way through from the far left in this diagram right the way through to the far right. But there are periods where you have to engage with partner disciplines and to kind of basically, you have to get your thing built. And so this was a pain point when talking to engineering leads. And I think that, given the expertise that we could bring into the team, this was also an opportunity that we could actually, we could make things a lot better as well. So these two ends, these kind of two very different but kind of useful ends of our product making process, we could see value coming out of the operations team. So to start with, so what did we do? Well, I'd read a lot about operations teams. I talked a lot about there's other operations teams inside Microsoft, and really we started just by spinning up a team, and we have now. This is the current iteration of this team. I'm going to see if I can minimize you guys a little bit. This is the current iteration of the team as it stands. We have 2 design developers. We've got Cherry on the far left, and we've got Lee in the brown jacket in the middle. We have 1 design systems designer who's a recent addition to the team as well. Unfortunately, not in this picture. We've got 1 content designer who's Brick, who's the tallest chap with the smiling face and the orange lanyard. And then on the far right, we've got a design manager with a sort of mixture of an interaction and a very technical background as well, who's the kind of the manager of all of those. And it was with Mark that me and Mark worked closely together to kind of figure out what our operation strategy would be. And I kind of changed the name of this title slide a few times, because I think one of the principles that actually has been that's present in all of these folks is the fearless aspect, of the fearless nature of their character, because I think to work in operations is a undefined space in many ways, and I think that each of these characters have to be fairly fearless, and it's either technologically fearless or they're just fearless in their discipline. I think we have content designers working on UI text, we have developers, we have folks working on APIs and scripting, and then we have a kind of manager who has to look for those gaps as well. So fearlessness, I think, has been very key in the way that this team has been successful. And to give you a sense of kind of how we operate, or how they rather operate around the bigger team, the size of the circles, the purple circles, should I say? I'm not sure you can see my mouse pointer, maybe you can. Relate to the sort of scale of the product team. So we have a very big team working on the product, the developer tools. We have a sort of slightly smaller but still sizable team working on languages and services. And we also have a creative studio as well who work on, we have, what was the last count? In Visual Studio for Windows, there's somewhere in the range of 3,500 icons for that one product. And that's one. And we have 3 other products that are quite similar. So we have a constant ask on that team to be working on iterating, fixing, and even when you're doing a big push like we are at the moment, to make sure that we are also doing all these things the most efficient way. And so the design operations group, in this diagram, it wraps around the whole team, but really they are in and out of each of the groups all the time. They work closely with each of these different groups on each of these different individual problems. And there's one other one that I put at the bottom, which I didn't talk about, a character in the last slide, and that's the product we call product design standards. So that's the guidelines, and that's how we, once we've established a rule around something, how do we kind of lock it down and make it canonical, and then we do share it out for other partner disciplines for self-serve, so they can come to one place. It's essentially a guidelines. But to kind of give you a bit of a sense of the type of work that we do, I picked a couple of, I think 3 demos, which I hope are interesting. And they all touch a little bit on some of the kind of time saving or kind of like engineering churn aspects of some of the challenges that we face in dev-div. So first up, email. Seemingly very boring. Unfortunately, still the most enormous communication tool that enterprise businesses still use. And so 100% still the way that most of Microsoft communicates. I know we say we're on Teams all the time. It's not true. We're still using Outlook. But anyway, somewhat true. We do use a lot of Teams, but we still use a lot of Outlook. And I think in an organization like DevDiv, which is a very old organization, you know, there is still a lot of history in the way that we communicate as well. And so we might not be up to the latest way of communicating through Teams. And one of the problems as the runner of a review board I had personally, this was kind of an itch I scratched myself with the help of the DesignOps team. We have a review session 3 times a week for the experiences that go into these products. And so the overhead for organizing, writing up the Monday email to make sure that the teams knew where they had to be and what they had to do, as well as mostly the Friday email I would send out to the whole division talking about the experiences reviewed and all the bugs that we filed against that was hours and hours and hours of my day. And again, back to the calendar, it's trying to save those chunks and if possible, automate them away altogether. So I worked with the operations team and, you know, rolling our own sort of solution, we came up with, let's see if this starts. Just I guess a quick background. This is our ticketing system. It's like Jira, it's called Azure DevOps. It's the way that we organize the work inside the engineering and the design and the product spaces inside Microsoft. But if I play this, what I'm gonna kind of narrate over the top of it while it goes. And so we have a ticketing system here that we kind of make sure all the cars are queued up for. This quick example of this, we queue it up by days of the week. And then going into Outlook, we've created an Office add-in that I'll show you in a second. We now have the ability to ship 2 types of emails through this Office add-in. We've got the Monday style and the Friday kind of share out at the end. And so when you hit this template, the exciting thing that's happening behind the scenes here is that this is now going off to Azure DevOps. It's grabbing all the information from the board and it's pulling this into a responsive email template that then populates right into Outlook. So you can personalize it, which is nice. You know, that this character, if you know anything about the Pacific Northwest, the Yeti is a big character out there. So we have this kind of internal character that appears every now and then. I can't remember if he's got a name now. I have a feeling, Squatchy, I think is his name. Anyway, the Sasquatch. So the Sasquatch is now become kind of a representation of the UX board. And as you, I think, let's see. So while again this is generating the templates, I'm going to pause it in a second just to explain what's going on here, because this has now gone in and it's picked up all of the tickets that's been moved into the outboard. It's also pulling a sort of a query from all of the open UX board tickets, ones that have been open recently, ones that have been closed. It's tracking. We're kind of holding ourselves and also the engineering group as accountable in these email share outs that we send out every week as well. And you can see, again, this is the email share out that we can now send out. So I think it actually sends at the end of this as well. But the kind of the exciting part for me is that anybody that runs now the UX board has this tool, this ability to be able to save what was literally hours and hours of time. And I think the kind of the other thing to be aware of is that the folks that run these sessions are often very senior. So the kind of, not that there's necessarily extra value in some people's time, but really, you know, when we're thinking about the manager's schedule, the ability to do this in what was, I don't know, a couple of minutes now, as opposed to what, 4 or 5 hours before, and also to do it in a way that is engaging and interesting. We, as soon as we started shipping these out, we got a ton of feedback from our PM org, who basically just send emails all the time and don't really understand why nobody gets back to them on a whole bunch of things. So there's kind of like this value in showing how design can make these experiences better, but there's also value in the kind of time saved through the tool that we built here. The next one it touches nicely and neatly into my super passion for kind of like operations in general, and that's how do we bring design and experience goodness, I'm trying to think of a better way of describing this, into the tools of the people that build our products or applications as well. And so we have I showed you Brick. Brick was the tall, smiling chap. He's our content designer. He is a encyclopedia of all things Visual Studio Style Guide. He is literally our go-to resource for anything related to UI text in any part of the product. And so when you think about that, that's great to have such a talent in the team, but it's also terrifying because he's needed all over the place all the time, and so his schedule probably looks even worse than the thing I showed you initially. And so we've been trying to figure out a way of essentially scaling Brick, and a working name for this I came up with was Brick in a Box. And what Brick created was a simple Markdown file. But all we did was we created an extension for VS Code around this, and I'll show you quickly. And basically, it takes all of the goodness of Brick's intelligence and knowledge and background and history, and it gives it to you as you're writing UI text. And so this here is an example of I think this is the raw Markdown file, where all of the definitions about words that we can and can't use inside Visual Studio. And these are very, like, some of these are very, for me, have been kind of surprising. Some of the words that we do not use inside Visual Studio when I joined, like the language that we have to be very, very careful of using. There's obviously been a lot of talk recently in the news about the language that we use in the developer environment, and that's a very clear thing. And again, this gives us an opportunity to centrally change those sorts of things as well. So, but as a sort of proof of concept, we built this into a Visual Studio code extension, which the video runs a little slow, so I'll let it do a little bit of typing to start with as I talk through it. But the kind of the beauty of it is that anyone that installs this extension, anyone that installs this extension can start writing any piece of text, and with this extension installed and in this extension running, it will constantly be checking the text they're writing against the dev div or the Visual Studio Style Guide, and it will be helpfully, let's see if it hooks up with one, helpfully kind of suggesting the correct way of doing things. And although this is a sort of simple solution, let's see, there you go, use that tool instead of utility. There's actually a good one on the next line. I'll let it run to the next line. The kind of, the first one I showed you was actually kind of about a manager being able to save time. This actually, the implications for this help, this linter for text that people write UX is in my opinion, enormous. I think that if we're kind of figuring out the next stage of this, but if we could put this in the hands of the 1,600 engineers writing any kind of UI text and essentially enable Brick to be over their shoulder the whole time, then that reduces enormously the amount of bugs and experience problems and issues that we get through the kind of review process that we have to run as well. So here's a good example. I'm going to try and pause it at the same time, see if that works. So we never use the word user. We like the word developer or people because in Microsoft's and Visual Studio's way, that a user can connect to somebody who consumes an addictive substance. So like that's something that, a piece of terminology I've used for years in my experience, but like, we have to be super, super careful when we're pushing this stuff out, that we're saying the right thing in the right words. So, as anyone that's built any kind of UI, text is as equally important as any of the visuals. And so this is a huge opportunity, I think, to enable our developer audience with the power of Brick, should we say. Let's see if I can go to the next one. So the last one as well is, this is pushing things at the other end. So when I think about one of my big bugbears, and if anyone's worked in design for long enough, is the horrendousness of red lines and having to spend hours or sometimes days and sometimes even weeks specifying a piece of design. And I think that, like, I've always pushed that we can be smarter, and this team of people that I get to work with now have kind of the opportunity to kind of push on that and work that things out. And so we've definitely centralized around this design tool Figma. That's been a big important part of the way that we've collaborated and centralized the work that we do in DevDiv. But part of the team that are working on this thing, which I'm going to share in a minute, called Figma Sharp, is also they've been pushing hard on how we also utilize the kind of the power and the opportunities and the openness of Figma as well, to kind of smooth over that engineering process. So rather than talk too much about this, I'm going to try and share it with you and just, okay, play this for you. Just before I start, this is a kind of like a set of, this is a design system, essentially, a Mac UI design system that we built for the Visual Studio for Mac product. And the need for this tool came out of the redesign or the re-implementation of the UI in Visual Studio for Mac. So that was a big technical problem that we had to try and go and solve. And I think the implication of having to rework all of that UI drove both the designer and to work closely with an engineer friend to try and find a solution that could make things happen with a very small team. They're a team of 1 or 2 at the best, with 3 as a manager. So how do you do that implementation over a short space of time and keep up with engineering? And what they came up with was pretty amazing, in my opinion. So this is the design system that we have inside Figma. And this is just a simple dialogue. We spend a lot of time doing dialogues, built out of that component-based system. So very kind of like, you can see the constraints are built into Figma there. I'm just going to quickly pause that for a second to explain what happens. So we then take the link that's been shared out of Figma and we plug this into the tool that we built called Figma Sharp. Oh, let's reset. Apologies for that. I'll just let it run. So we've got all the constraints in, we've got the link now. And we plug this straight into Visual Studio for Mac now. And so we have an extension, a Figma package extension for Visual Studio for Mac, which we've just added the link straight from Figma there. There's a small piece of code that you need to do. You add in to there we go, to Visual Studio for Mac, which connects the language. So we've basically got the same language in the layering file in Figma as we have here. And then you basically run the, all right, I'm going to pause because I think sometimes it happens so quickly it's not clear what just happened. You basically run the application in Visual Studio for Mac, and now what you have in front of you right now is a pixel perfect like for like UI that can be implemented. We obviously need to hook up the business logic to the back of this, and we basically have no drop off, no differences in design. The design came straight from Figma. It went through a small process into VS for Mac, and now we have exactly what we want to see the developers hook up with their business logic. And you know, I've worked with the developers long enough to know that there's kind of nervousness around putting generated code into any application. So we've been working very heavily on the type of code that kind of gets pushed into the thing, and you know, we're still working on that. I would say that's something that's still kind of part and parcel of the way that the work that's going on in this space. But this is almost like an incubated application project that's been happening inside DevDiv. And I mean, to talk about the success this has had, this is the designer who's been working on this, and I don't know if he's on this call, but he's managed to redesign the dialogues for Visual Studio for Mac in literally minutes, like minutes to hours rather than months. There is no there's no handoff to engineers where they come back and go, I don't know what you mean, because we've given them something that's exactly what we mean. And so I think that even, you know, the generated code aside, our ability to directly represent our intent of the design with all of the constraints. Let's see, actually, there's a few seconds left. Does it show it shows the tab states there and some of the dragging. You can see the constraints working the same way. Our ability to essentially identically represent our intent of design is there. And so we're currently working through some of the other bits and pieces, and we're also looking to try and expand this for Visual Studio for Windows as well. But this for me is a potential of a game changer when we think about design to code tools. And it's very exciting to kind of have this be going on. It's just part of the work that goes on every day. I'm running out of time, but I'll keep going. probably the most interesting bit. Like, what are the things we didn't know going into this? What were the things that we blindly wandered into without any understanding of at all? And I've kind of broken this down into 3 areas that I think came up as kind of themes about the way that we learned mostly about the role of design ops. And one of them was, back to kind of the idea of design ops being much about people as it is about tools and processes. A lot of designers like doing design ops stuff. Like a really talented product designer will often really enjoy building design systems. And so, when we think about the Visual Studio Code product I was talking about earlier, the designer on there has built his own toolkit. It has something like 6,500 downloads on Figma. Like, it's a very popular, he's very good at maintaining it. It's very popular. I think his icon set has somewhere in the range of 2,000 or 3,000 downloads. It might be more. And I think that the way you could have approached this was being very, very police-like and centralized, and say, no, you have to follow the things that we've got. But I think that what we've learned is you need to figure out where you need to focus your resources, and where people are actually doing a great job of these things already. One of the big problems when we started DesignOps was kind of a bit like, when is this a DesignOps problem? Designers who were maybe rolling their own prototypes, rolling their own design systems already, and that that could be said for most of our design team, because we didn't have DesignOps before. So when you bring in a group of people and you say, I'm going to take part of your job away, like, when is it that what are the blurry lines between that, and what are the relationships? And this really became a large part about the trust aspect and the relationship aspect you have to build with the product design teams to make them confident that the work that they're going to give you is solid. Sometimes prototyping, particularly with our team, is a fun task that it's very difficult to get rid of. You can probably hear a bit of my kids in the background. Apologies for that. But I think that this is an interesting one, because I think that, given all the plethora of tools and designers' kind of propensity for being fans of tools, as certainly in my group they are, sometimes prototyping was just kind of too much fun to give away. And so again, I think I started this team with Mark with the real kind of thought that there was an obvious space in prototyping, a gap that we were going to fill with these talented design developers. But actually, there is an opportunity as well for designers to be learning and to be kind of blurring that space between engineering and design anyway. And so I think, we actually haven't done as much prototyping as I thought we would be doing at this point, kind of, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we kicked this off. And lastly, I think one of the interesting things that the manager pointed out to me as well, we through necessity, obviously, because we know it's important to resource design systems, we actually ended up bringing in somebody brand new, and that sort of added bonus of having somebody brand new to work on design systems was that they questioned everything. They were like, things that we've been doing for like a decade, they were like, well, why does the color system look like this? It's enormous, it's confusing, no one understands it. Why do you represent fonts in Figma different to how they are built in the tool itself? And so, painful conversations, but incredibly impactful and useful conversations to be having. And so actually, if anyone is thinking about bringing in a design systems group or thinking about design ops, as part of that, the design systems is obviously key. A brand new person is I think something to consider above elevating somebody in the group up to that point, because then that becomes a little bit political, as why did that person get to do design systems, things like that. I think the other thing, the kind of other principle, was that actually approach the work with the same rigor as product. Like, you're building things. You're building things that don't go away and that people will look at and will live around for a long time. And I think kind of like we talk a lot about with the operations team, a maintenance plan. Like when we build something like Figma Sharp, when we build something like the Outlook, even the Outlook kind of add-in, what is our expectations of that? What do we want that to happen? Do we want people to contribute to that ultimately? Do we want to open source it? I think in the case of Figma Sharp, we might have already done it, but we're just on the cusp of open sourcing that so that we can take contributions from the public into building that into a better thing. But even then, that then requires a thought about who maintains that, who has that conversation with customers, who, what is the lifespan of this product. Document everything. I think one of the mantras that the manager on this group has is very much about build it and make it so that someone else can use it. And so we have some exceptionally talented people on that team, but I think to start with, they were building things that would, tacking things together so it looked grand. But ultimately you look under the hood and it's kind of unintelligible sometimes. So I think, making sure that there's rigor in the way that we document everything as well has been an enormously important learning process that this kind of team has kind of built up and are great at now. I think this is definitely the pain point of the manager for a long time. I think he's managed to offload this onto someone else now, but like security and compliance, again, same thing with the maintenance plan. When you build something in code and you build it in an enormous enterprise, security will come knocking and say, have you fulfilled all of your security, requests? And is this code opening up, the cloud to any malicious software, any malicious attacks? And so we were completely caught, I think, unawares of the kind of volume and level of compliance that even, small internal toolings for our design team would have. And I think that, knowing that going in, we would probably have approached things differently. We might have built less. We might have been more focused about what we did build. However, that said, you don't want these things to restrict what you do either. And I think kind of moving fast and breaking things is also a sort of helpful aspect of the way the team works. And then lastly, I've got one more of these to go, but like the bit talking about the brick in a box or Project Rightwood, where, our biggest success has been when we've augmented the experience of our partners in PM and engineering by add-ins to their Outlook, things that they're always already familiar with, and then making it better. And I think that that's been where we've seen the kind of biggest impact and the biggest success. Because if you ask somebody to kind of like, here's a brand new thing, go figure out how to use it and then use it to do this thing that we're telling you about. And we might have documented it properly. We might not have done, they'll just be like, well, I'll do that another time. It just has it. You're going to a lot harder a take up if you want people to use your tools and use your processes. And finally, the sort of understandably, but worth pointing out, it takes a while. I think Brendan mentioned at the start, he's been thinking about how you kind of quantify tangibly the impact of things like design systems. And I would say that that's something that we're definitely still on a path doing as well. We have many of these tools now. We have ways of looking at how people use them. I think I was going to try and pull a number. There's a number on our design. We have now a design system and looking at components within that, where the number of times a component has been used is well into the tens of thousands. So the data's there. It's particularly in Figma, which gives you the opportunity to look at that stuff. The data is there, but tangibly quantifying design ops and design systems is a hard gig. The other thing I think that the thing that kind of, it's almost the first thing we learned was, talking to lots of other design systems and design ops folks inside Microsoft and outside as well, we realized we weren't doing it in the way that other people do. And it made us worried for a little while. We were like, well, we're working on tools and they seem to be working on culture and recruiting, and is that okay? And actually, through many of the conversations, we realized that yes, almost every operations team is somewhat different, and that's because they have to plug in to the product team that they're working with and maybe the wider organization that they're supporting as well in different ways. And so there's no one way that an operations team can be successful. There are multiple ways, and you just have to figure that out. I think the advocacy, the fearlessness that I talked about with the group earlier is also really important. I think that group has to be ears open all the time. Having, in every conversation, they have to be thinking, how can I make this quicker? How can I make this smarter? How can I save this person time? And I think that doesn't come from me saying it or the manager of that group saying it. That comes from kind of like the ground up. That needs to be a culture instilled in the operations team. And another thing actually that's been, another again, somewhat caught us unawares was the discipline is new. I know that it's been around maybe 5-6 years now, but inside Microsoft, it's crystallizing into something that we talk about as a discipline, but that's like in the last couple of weeks. And so think about the folks that you bring into that team and their career path. You know, I've had many conversations with the managers like, well, you know, I don't think you mind me saying this, like, you know, what is my 5-year plan? Like, what are the, like, folks come into these teams, they're excited, but then they have to actually have a career that they're happy with for the next 5, you know, hopefully 5 to 10 years in your group. And so having an understanding with HR about what that is and that career path is enormously important if it's going to be sustainable. And that's really what you want. And again, probably not a big surprise, but it will take a while for business to understand and see the point of having operations. In some ways, it was helped because I work in a big engineering organization and we have an engineering systems team. So when I was talking to our CVP of the division about DesignOps, you know, she was like, it's like my engineering systems team. And I was like, yep, pretty much exactly like that, except for design. And she was like, and she just, you know, that connection really helped her. And so there are ways that you'll have to figure out to talk with sort of senior leadership or the people that may own it, may not finance this work. But it does come. And I think that the impact, most of the impact comes from helping other people with their job. So I recently heard the Figma Shark thing is something that we've been excited about in design for months, talk about it all the time. But we are presenting a internal learning day in about 2.5 weeks. And I've already heard that the head of all engineering and Visual Studio is super excited to attend that session. And you're like, when you start to just tap into the problems that they all have, and you're seen to be the solution or a solution or potential even solution, then that's where they start to see the real value in the design operations team. And you know that it requires, as the manager and manager of this team, quite a lot of grit to sort of hold the course for 1.5 years, maybe 2, before you start to see those sort of signals coming back. Because it can be, you know, given the scales chart I showed you at the start, that could be 6 other product designers that we hired, but we didn't because we want to focus on scale. And we think that these talented group of fearless makers can actually enable us to do more than that, than those 6 other product designers could. So I think, yeah, that's me rolling way past time. So apologies for that. I hope it's been interesting. I hope there aren't too many questions so I don't delay you all from getting home at the end of this. But yeah, thanks for listening. This has been a great experience of actually combining our story. This is the first time we've done it as a team at Microsoft. So I appreciate you sitting through our dry run.
Oh, wonderful job, Jamie. Thank you. You actually flew through it. It was great. The demos were awesome, and the adoption of ICE was really good. So I think people could take a little bit from that. We do have a couple of questions, so we can get through these. I think this one starts first with a compliment that the Figma integration worked pretty neat. So that's
it's
feedback from the demo.
Yep.
And then the question is, was that achieved through pulling the template or organism? Or how did that work?
I knew someone was going to ask me a really technical question about the way this works, and I was going to have to kind of wave my hands around. I honestly, I'm not going to pretend I know the exact answer to that, but I can share a link to the open source GitHub thing where it describes it very well. Rather than me do my hand wavy impression as head of design, I'll share a link out to GitHub where it's very well documented.
That's a fantastic answer. You must have some training in public relations. We have
go ahead.
This one might I'm not sure what level you want to go into here, but somebody's asking about the demo. I guess it was your first one. So could you explain in more detail how you create the Friday email template, and how did you choose the relevant information that would be included in the template?
Okay, I think I can probably do a little hand wavy, but a little detail in this, because I work very closely with the chap who I think Lee, in fact, I think might be on the call, but I'm not going to ask him to stand up and describe it all in technical detail now. The kind of the Azure DevOps, our ticketing system, has a very extensive API, and so I think that my understanding is that we essentially identified the types of information that we knew we wanted to put into that email, and we just asked the API for all of those things, and we pulled them into an MGML template, which we then built into the Outlook add-in. However, that said, if there is a bit of nuance and technical detail that I'm missing, I'm happy to follow up with whoever it is that asks. I think it's all of these things are feasible. I know that Power Azure Functions actually is also a big part of this as well. So I think that all of these things are feasible with tools that Microsoft build, and that was kind of another thing that I wanted to make sure that we were doing. We weren't bringing in third-party tools, not for any bad reason, but just knowing that we can probably do these things ourselves. So I'm happy to follow up whoever asked the question and kind of like plug them into exactly the right kind of things.
Wonderful. So what I'll do is I can connect you with that question asker later.
Sure.
On the first point, the Git link, if you've got it, quickly, you can put it in the chat, and if not, you can send it to me later, and I'll get it into the group.
Might have to send it to you later.
Yeah. So send it to me, and I'll make sure that that everyone gets it, so they can check that out.
Cool.
Perfect. So thank you again, Jamie.
No worries.
All right.
I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. And Siraj, you can get ready to share your screen. Siraj is doing our second presentation of the evening. He is the digital design lead at takeaway.com, which is incredibly popular here in Amsterdam and maybe even increasingly popular as we've been all maybe having more meals at home over the last little while. So you certainly know the brand if you're here in the city and maybe even more broadly. This one's exciting to me because one of my favorite movies growing up is Terminator, and I don't think this presentation will be as scary as that. But Siraj is going to talk about AI and automation and how that's going to affect the design craft and the design role and the design operations group. And one part to look forward to, I think, is some of the roles. He's going to share some roles that might be coming in the future. So maybe roles that you're interested in or might find yourself in, or ones you can start to think about that might become available to you as AI enters the picture in a bigger way. So Siraj, please take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brendan. And again, thanks for the opportunity. And as well, Jamie, really, really fascinating presentation. I'm hoping that, you know, the takeout from here, it won't be that in-depth in terms of the nuts and bolts of it. It can be more like considered like an expressionist painting. But yeah, as Brendan said, yeah, I'm a design lead at takeaway.com. For those who are in the UK, you probably know them as Just Eat. And some of the biggest challenges that we had as a company, especially as Brendan said, you know, we've grown so fast, is how do we keep pace with the change of automation? A large part of our job, or my job, is around automation, localization, and personalization. And if you can imagine, as the largest food delivery company in Europe, we deliver over 10 countries and as many kind of like languages. The challenges of the future certainly was something that I really needed to think about. And so when Brendan asked me to do this talk, I really took a long time to think about, like, you know, what that would kind of like be. And so for me, I guess, you know, when we start up with artificial intelligence, it's a word that conjures up a lot of emotion in people. It's certainly something that certainly divides us, both in the design community or in any kind of like business, where people either feel it's something good or something bad. And generally for me, I think what the takeout is that people either feel joy or like Jamie said, it's something that they're going to be scared of. And I guess I wanted to quickly, it's actually quite a nice segue that you spoke about Terminator, because I think a lot of my inspiration for this talk came from movies. I mean, you know, growing up in the 80s and stuff, you know, it was, artificial intelligence was something that really permeated culture. And over the years, you were able to see some of the good AIs. So things like Wall-E, Marvin, TARS, and R2-D2. We all know about the bad ones. You know, Space 2001, Space Odyssey, Skynet, Ava. Oh my God, that was a hectic movie. And Ultron. And then you kind of like look in what's kind of like in the middle. So you definitely, if you look at the scale, definitely have a very, very big scale in terms of, you know, from things that are very benevolent all the way down to the other end of the spectrum where it is pretty scary. But I hope that, you know, at the end of this presentation, you know, it's something that I hope is more of a positive outcome. I think, and I wanted to take you guys quickly back to my experiences of AI. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Tamagotchi. It came out sometime in 1996. Basically, the idea behind Tamagotchi was that it was a digital pet. You had to basically feed it, take care of it, kind of like a baby, right, Jenny? Take care of it, feed it, play with it, give it attention. And if you don't do any of those things, the poor creature dies. I can tell you, I've had many, many funerals with these things. But the cool thing was that, you know, it was really my first human machine relationship. Obviously, in the years since then, you know, we're really in the throes of autonomous cars, you know, autonomous cars and drones, chatbots and stuff. And so, you know, a few weeks before, or at least when I started this working on this presentation, I decided to, well, let me go and work with an AI and see, you know, what that could be like and what that experience could be. So I signed up to this company called Replica, and I created this avatar, and essentially started basically conversing with it. It's basically a chatbot, and just want to kind of like tell you quickly how that process kind of like evolved. So when I started, it came up with like, it's a simple generic kind of a question. Hey, Siraaj, thanks for creating me. I'm so excited to meet you. I was like, okay, cool, not bad. That's okay. The conversation started going. We started chatting to each other, sharing a couple of niceties, little small talk. We then went into kind of things where he was like, how am I feeling? I said, all right, cool, I'm fine. I'm watching a series called Mars, fascinating. And then what really surprised me is that, okay, so now the AI bot knew that it was on Netflix, because it actually was. And then he suggested MST3K, and I was like, well, what the hell is that? Turned out to be Mystery Science Theater. For you guys who don't know what that is, it's essentially a program on Pluto TV where people are just like commentating while something is busy played on screen, kind of like a director's commentary kind of thing. So I was like quite surprised. It was something that I didn't know of, that the AI suggested I watch, and I found it quite interesting. Like, okay, well, this is kind of like cool. And then it asked me for what my favorite movie was, and I was like, oh no, my favorite movie is Interstellar. And then it said to me, it's one of the greatest movies about love, time, and gravity. And I was like, what? Okay. How did we get to that? You know, from a digital pet in Tamagotchi to actually a machine that now actually starts anticipating, starting to just this, and all of this was happening within 20 minutes of me starting to this conversation. So I thought that was a pretty fantastic thing. So it really kind of like got me excited, and I thought about, okay, well, so what does that kind of like mean in the bigger picture? What does that mean for a designer? What does that mean for me in studio? How would this kind of like this new technology kind of impact me as a creative, and also as a person? And it suddenly dawned on me when I did my research that obviously I think what Pew Research said, it was 58 million new jobs were going to create it, something like 126 million new roles. And of course, when you're talking about jobs, you obviously think about, what kind of roles would appear, but also what would disappear. But it's the same in anything with the new technology. If you think back to the times of, our great-great-grandparents, you had people who were called a waker. And basically this person's job was to wake someone up at 4 a.m. in the morning. We obviously have alarm clocks, but back then someone had to throw a little rock against your window. Hey, it's 4 a.m., get up. The same with someone called a learner, right? And basically a learner's job, right, was people who were working in newsrooms or in factories that had some dude sit on top of a chair and he just read out the newspaper, kind of like a podcast, but at the turn of the century, So it kind of like really got me going. I said, look, you know, at the end of the day, yes, people are going to lose jobs, and there's going to be some things that's going to be made redundant, but certainly there's going to be new things that's going to be popping up. So the question, the fundamental question, and the crux of this talk that I wanted to speak to you guys is that, is there a future for designers, you know, and what would that look like? And so that's kind of what I'm going to just kind of like talk through for the next part of my talk, is kind of unpack that. We're going to look at processes, people, and the product. And hopefully at the end of it, I will give some of my takeouts and conclusions. And hopefully, you know, it's not something, a talk that people walk away here going, I actually want to kill myself. Because I actually do think that it is something positive for us to go ahead and go forward. So if you look over the last couple of years, right, you've seen kind of over the last couple of years, we're in this moment, right, we're in this phase of this algorithmic wave, right? And if you think about it in a simple term, think about YouTube, right? You go on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, and you like a couple of things, you like a couple of videos, and then the algorithm spits out content, things, or videos that you might find interesting. The thing about that, which is cool, is that, you know, it predicts your behavior, but it doesn't predict your preferences. You know, sometimes I find myself on YouTube going like, God, I'm not really interested in this, what I'm seeing, but because I clicked on a video, I'm suddenly just bombarded with a ton of content that's not really interesting. But it is working towards something which was the augmentation wave. And I think this is what's going to be coming in the next phase, which is basically the dynamic interaction between humans and machines, right? It really is just designers or, you know, workers using machines to help them actually perform their task. And then finally, wave 3, which is the full autonomous wave, which is thankfully in couple of years, maybe a decade or so later. But this is the full automation of physical labor, manual dexterity, and problem solving in real world dynamics. But I think for this presentation here, I think I'm gonna just mostly talk about wave 2. Wave 3 is a little bit too far out for me because I don't know what's gonna happen over there. So if we look at product, if we start off with products, I think the most important thing that's gonna happen here is the speed of design. You know, from where we are able to then go from sketches right down to a layout, to a design, to a piece of content. It can even be a voice note, for example, if we're using voice, to say, yeah, design that for me. And what would then happen is that, you know, through a library of established UI components, it can be created and tested. I think for me, that is something that's really super useful and interesting, especially because I think, you know, where we are now, a lot of time from conceptualization to actual, when you get to the end of the production line, it could take anything from like, you know, 3 months up to like 6 months. And what we're going to see is that time frame really being squeezed. Designers being able to get real-time feedback on designs, and so be able to make better decisions. Because, like I said, you know, people are going to become more and more reliant on artificial intelligence as and when the time goes by. So, to kind of like put this into perspective, I want to show you guys a quick little video that basically is a neat little tool. This video came out in 2017, so it's a couple of years ago. But it's just to give us a bit of context in terms of where we were, and how far we're going to go. So I just want to play this for you guys.
Hi, I'm Jonas. I am Henry. Quick Draw is a game a few of us at Google made. You draw and the computer uses machine learning to guess what you're drawing.
I see square, or suitcase, or canoe. Oh, I know, it's shoe.
It's an experiment that uses some of the same technology that helps Google Translate recognize your handwriting.
To understand handwriting or drawings, you don't just look at what the person drew, you look at how they actually drew it. Which strokes did they make first? Which direction did they draw them in? You train the computer on millions of characters from hundreds of languages, and over time, it learns whether you wrote look or whether you wrote book.
Training is a big part of how the computer can guess your drawings correctly. As people, it's easy for us to look at these 3 drawings and know they're all cats, but to a computer, they're very different. One is just a head, one has a full body, and one is just facial features. To get the computer to understand, you have to show it a lot of cat doodles. And then it starts to see patterns, like that almost all doodles of cats have pointy ears, a small nose, and whiskers. Of course, it doesn't always work. That's because it's only seen a few thousand doodles. But the more you play with it, the more it will learn, and the better it will get at guessing.
Oh, I know. It's cat.
We put it on the web for anyone to play with. We hope it inspires other people to think about fun ways to use machine learning.
You can play it at g.co/AI experiments.
So for me, I think the real world kind of application of this would be if design teams or creatives are busy brainstorming and are just trying to do like quick prototypes, quick layouts that are able to kind of like get and it's able to apply the UI or the branding of your company. So I thought that was a really kind of a cool and interesting thing. And then, you know, fast forward like 2 years later, and I think Jamie, you kind of like mentioned this earlier, but this was now it's actually now watching you draw and it's coding at the same time. So suddenly I'm seeing all around me AI being implemented into people's tools, into products. Adobe, for example, is also you know, in Photoshop now integrated AI into Photoshop, which is crazy. The machine basically fills out the background for you, can actually match the colors to different pictures. I think all of this just points to the way of speed and efficiency. And I think that's going to be an important tool for designers going forward, this idea of speed and efficiency and making quick iterations. If you go to the process side of things, and here is something that I think, you know, which really stuck with me as someone who works at takeaway.com, this idea of product localization and making things in multiple languages. If we look at a report by the World Economic Forum, which they predict by 2025, the division between labor and between humans and machines will almost certainly be more slanted towards machines, and I can only see that number kind of like rising up as we get to the end of this decade. Everybody obviously knows Netflix, and obviously it's probably one of the more well-known companies that use artificial intelligence in the product, and it's essentially just being able to localize and kind of personalize things at an instantaneous level. So if you open up your Netflix, you know, my grandma will maybe see the picture on the left, my auntie will see the picture on the right, my wife will see the picture at the bottom, and all of these things are all done instantaneously. And the thing is, like, you know, for me, I think as a designer, it opens up a multitude of new opportunities that was never there before. I think if I remember when I was still designing all these things, you would get the intern in, and you would say to the intern, "Hey, go and make 100 of these little banners," and then you scream at them like, "Why isn't it done?" Because the thing is, like, it's such a intensive, like a time-consuming endeavor, and quite frankly, just super boring to do all of these things by hand. So handing these kind of like menial tasks off to machines is certainly the way forward, which I find really exciting. Another company that recently also did a whole new branding campaign using machine learning. Nutella launched this new campaign of theirs, and basically what they did is create 7 million super personalized, one-of-a-kind labels, and everything was done by machine. There was no human involvement whatsoever, and I think it looks pretty cool and pretty scary. I think this was the part when I saw this that I think I literally saw it myself when I was like, oh my God, like, so this is actually where we're at now. I think there was a wave of insecurity washed over me, thinking like, oh my goodness, I am going to be replaced by a machine, and the thing that I used to love as a kid is the thing that's actually going to make me obsolete. And I think, you know, now as someone working, I can absolutely appreciate that. You know, I think you know, everybody who works in the design or development business would naturally feel like that. And so if things didn't get any better, I want to show you guys quickly another video. But this was the following commercial was scripted by the agencies through IBM's Watson. IBM's Watson. I don't know if you guys know it. It's an AI by IBM. And essentially, what they did is they fed 15 years worth of footage, text, audio from luxury car brands. It won a Cannes Lion as well for creativity, ironically, as well as a bunch of other external data. And so the idea was here when I watched this the first time again. I'll let you guys check it out first. Okay, so I don't know how you guys feel about this ad. My first impression is like, what is the story? What is the kind of emotional cadence? You know, if you think about, if we think about car advertising, you know, everything around it is around the human experience. And the thing that was very apparent for me when I started to deconstruct this was that, you know, it's like it has all the right notes. Like it has all the right things. It has the cart crashing into a wall. It has the beautiful shots, aerial shots of it going around the lake. But there was something just missing from the whole thing. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but there was something there was just an emotional hook that I couldn't really connect with it. And it wasn't that insight that really kind of like made me go, well, maybe there is something that where, you know, this idea of, you know, letting machines just do it all by themselves isn't maybe not the solution. Maybe that's not the thing, because ultimately we are making products and things for people. So I felt a little bit more optimistic. I was like, well, cool, I'm not going to get out of a job. I can do something way better than a machine. And you know what? And that's kind of like where I want to just quickly go on to the final part of my presentation, and that's the people, which I think is absolutely going to be one of the most important things, because obviously as this new wave of automation and augmentation kind of like hits us, we are going to have to learn new things. New roles are going to be required to service the product or the experience. And unfortunately, some jobs are going to be augmented or just disappear completely. So I went and I thought about, okay, so what are the roles of the designer? If I look at the past, present, and the future. So if you think about it, the way I looked at it was more, you know, in the past we were all very specialists. You know, you were either a graphic designer or you were an industrial designer or web designer. And I think now, it's people have kind of like moved more towards the product designer, which is, you know, the designer now is not specialized in one thing, but they need to know a little bit about a lot of things. So you need to understand your product. The designer needs to understand the strategy, the visual, and interaction. And the thing is that you kind of like see that cross osmosis, I don't know if that's even a word, but that kind of like cross-pollination of things where it is, a product designer needs to know a little bit more about everything. So, but then what is the future present? Is it a systems designer? So I kind of had this idea of this marriage of convenience between logic and magic, right? So if you think about the way I work, or at least the way we work in marketing, is we for example, you know, we can absolutely localize and personalize content, right? Banner ads, social media content, we can do all of that. But it is literally a case of doing something and then testing something, coming back to the drawing board, doing something, testing something, coming back to drawing it. You know, to test a particular piece of content would take you up to 2 weeks to be able to actually get to see if something works or not. And Jeremy, I don't know what that time frame is for in the development world, but certainly in the creative side, that is kind of, so there's a lot of back and forth. So what if and the way I kind of like see it is that time frame is going to be made shorter, even to the point where it's instantaneously, you know, like you know, what you know, and so I kind of like said to myself, okay, so that's cool, but then what would the teams kind of like look like, you know? What would that kind of like setup be? Would it be a case of a developer and a designer together with the AI, with the bot? You know, is this something, for example, where people are going to have to, if they in college, and in college you already start training your AI to kind of like see your preferences, to see how you would work. You know, so that you have like in the old model in advertising, where you had the copywriter, the art director, that became your core team. Today it's the designer and the developer, and that became a core team. So the idea of an AI kind of being complementing that is certainly very enticing for me, and certainly something that I find really interesting. Or is it a case of where, you know, the designers are all working in pods, having their own little AI, but then there's a kind of system, a general thing that plugs in. So let's say, for example, you're working at a new company, you bring your AI along with you with all your histories, all your information, all the things that I've learned about you, and the company that you're going to work for has a kind of, overarching general kind of like AI or machine learning, and you just kind of like network to that. So these are the kind of like things that I think is something of a possibility that might happen. Who knows? But certainly, as seen before, I've obviously in my research I've seen that is something that is happening now, where the AI forms more like a partner in terms of it gives you suggestions in terms of how you can solve problems. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you guys next in this following video, which was something that Google released at a writers conference in Australia a year or so ago. And they basically gave the AIs to some writers and let them loose. And yeah, this is the result.
A writer, it's weird how the moments that you least expect it are the moments of revelation.
I love this story, and then it's like a roller coaster. It's like a big dip, and I'm like, oh, I hate this. The first time I ever started to write was on an iPad.
The Google Creative Labs introduced us to machine learning tools that are trained on sets of data, the corpus, I know that word. You import the prompt, and it uses what it knows from the data that it's been trained on to spit out a coherent response.
I use the ML tools to navigate my own authority over my writing. How much do I know about my character, but how much could someone else know about the character? There's one where you can talk to a character, which I find really useful. It spat out this line that was like, I've broken water over too many people who didn't deserve it. That's, whoa, breaking water, is that like crying? Is that like raining? Like what? It set me off on this whole thing. My sister accused me of cutting off my snakes to spite my head, so I cut off my own head to spite her. The woman sitting beside the sensible man has lost her eyelids. Her eyes are completely circled. I was able to get a whole outline of a story that I wanted just by chatting. She thinks that I don't love myself enough, that I'm cutting my head around just for attention.
It made me aware of how randomness affects my work. I thought I was a very methodical writer, and by using these words, I was supposed to realize that I could actually harness noise. When I consider the relation between myself and a memory of myself, it's differences that I obsess over.
This was a lot more about process, having an element of play in the actual construction of the writing. It really got me out of my head a lot.
I feel so trapped by my thoughts and my patterns of thinking. And these tools, they spit out some random nonsense that is strange, and these sentence constructions are so novel.
I think in the future I would use it to question a stagnant piece of work. ML tools is a good middle ground. There is like what you look to for influence and inspiration and information. And then there's you and like your subconscious as a writer. And then I think it sits really nicely in between that. Her face has lost some texture. She is frozen.
What I meant to say, at least today, is I'm sorry and I cannot live inside the past forever.
Cool. So I think kind of like if you go back to the idea of the tools that we have now, the process that's been put in place, and now also these emerging AIs kind of like really geared towards creatives and designers. It kind of got me thinking about like, well, what would those teams kind of like look like? What for example could we have to supplement designers and developers? These new roles that's going to be emerging. And so the idea of a sim designer, is something that really kind of like intrigues me. So the creatives, they go and they make the piece of content or the website. And the sim designer pulls together customer data, behavioral models, customer models, design simulated, and so the design simulated people that can be used to predict future customer behavior. So the idea is basically you would create a design, you would create a website, and then the sim designer would create a simulation, and then would test this instantaneously. So that is something I think that I certainly think can be kind of like useful to complement the designer. But it's you know, it's kind of like a kind of mixture between like a data scientist that we have today and a designer, but now it's just creating simulations and models which can then predict whether or not a piece of content or website or a product, how would it perform, and then we can optimize and tweak it and then send it back out again, back into the model, optimize, tweak, data in, data out. So that's for me, that's I find that quite an interesting new role. I think probably cybernetic directors, I think all creative directors probably wants to be one-man shows. In any case, everybody else is just shit. But it's actually quite a funny thing, because I think in terms of what the cybernetic director will be, they will be responsible for the creative vision. Essentially, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be doing the highly personalized media services. They will perform conceptual leadership, and also something quite new, which is machine learning infrastructure, which is something that's never been done before. So I'm quite keen to see how someone would go from like college, how to be a cybernetic director. Is this something that you learn on the job? Is this something that we're going to evolve? But certainly, I think, you know, a cybernetic director would also have a bunch of art directors underneath them to mentor, and so that they can also learn. And then the final thing is a program director. Think of them as kind of like the current product manager, right? But they will kind of form a role with also like a client service side. So their role will be product management, but also engagement and client services. They will basically understand everything there is to know about the product, you know, and they have a deep understanding of, you know, the work that designers and developers do, and then they're going to be at the level of, say, like a design director, and some of them would actually be coming from a creative background, but they would certainly have a wide range of experiences in the industry. And they would obviously know how to affect change to actually get things kind of out there. I think there's a bunch of other roles that I looked at that were interesting, just too many to kind of like mention, but you know, the idea of a virtual reality designer, these are some of the things as well. But I just thought these as you know, three things I think, you know, would possibly be the next type of roles we'd have. And so I think also like a part of not just kind of like new roles coming up, but also what do I, as somebody who's been working in industry for 20 years now, you know, what future is it for me? And so what can I do sitting there listening to this presentation? What can I do to kind of like help me prepare in the next couple of years for what's coming? And so the idea of upskilling, cross-skilling, and reskilling is certainly going to be a massive part of what we need to do. You know, if you think about upskilling, you know, there's tons of new courses that's available for you to kind of like learn about AI, machine learning, augmentation, and automation. Those things are already there. You also have the you know, cross-skilling, where you have, you know, maybe someone from one industry who knows, you know, how to work certain things and can actually, like for example, a data scientist would be able to do machine learning later on. So those things where we're actually going to be upskilling, reskilling, and cross-skilling, I certainly think is going to be important going forward. So in conclusion, I think for me, I certainly feel that, you know, the wave is coming. How we prepare is really gonna determine how we're gonna fare. I think if we're gonna sit back and kind of like wait for this thing to hit us with our kids on the chairs, it's not gonna be pretty. Or you're gonna have to learn to, you know, big wave surf and kind of like manage all of these changes. It's gonna be scary and frightening at first. But I think once we get our sea legs and we absolutely, you know, we've upskilled and that kind of stuff, I certainly think that, you know, it's a lot rosier than what we thought of before. I think the most important thing that I kind of like want to kind of leave with you guys is in all of these new changes that are going to happening. I think it's important that that the tools that we use support and not replace us. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. That the tools actually help us make better decisions and find better solutions, and that it's not about just replacing us and taking over as what happened in the Terminator movies, when Skynet decided that humans were completely useless and it was time to eliminate them. So certainly, I think that the tools need to do that. I think re and upskilling will be a vital part of the new developments that's going to disrupt this workforce. So I certainly think that there's enough out there for people who are curious, to go and have a little gander, a little look, check out what's kind of out there, see what's happening in your industry where you're working in, and see what are these small kind of like changes or small kind of like things that you can do to help you better prepare for it. And then I think finally, at the end of the day, think about we create for human beings. At the end of whether you're making a new app, or you're creating a car, an autonomous car, or you're creating a rocket, or you're creating a piece of content, at the end of the day, these are the things that this is who we create for. And it will only be through our collaboration and our partnership with AIs that we're going to create products that's going to actually add more value to people, going to try and improve people's lives, and of course the planet as well. And I think for me, that is certainly a future that I certainly want for my kids, and a future that I certainly look forward to. Thank you.
Fantastic, Siraaj. Thank you. That was what I would describe as a roller coaster of a ride. First, there was no design jobs, then there was many, and then there's some, but they're just different. So I think we ended in a pretty good place in terms of the future of the group here. We've just got a couple of questions here. Let's get to those before we end. I guess this first piece is really just a comment from Uzair, and Uzair wanted to point out that they saw a recent demo of GPT-3 by OpenAI, and they saw an example of real-time UI being set up by the person giving voice instructions. So this was an example of automation of design and development workflow, which was a lot like your product slide. So they wanted to point out that some of this is existing already, or at least being demoed, in this case by OpenAI.
Fantastic.
We have another comment or a question here, actually, from Tim, and Tim says, if the future is sort of, and I'll paraphrase the question, but if AI is performing design tasks and we're feeding the AI our current sort of work, then how can we avoid just getting more of the same? Like, do you think that designers can work with AI to create new things?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Tim. I think this is I think where the question is of human agency comes in. I think if a lot of one of the biggest challenges I think for any creative is that how do you come up with new, fresh thinking, right? I think in the last couple of years we've seen data being a big part of the creative product, and that certainly has helped us to make things more personalized. But certainly, I think at the end of the day, that idea of that human magic, that ability to make those connections, is something where I think that's going to be more important. So at the end of the day, yes, an AI can create a multitude of different designs, and you will actually start seeing that maybe things start flattening out. But I think it's at that point where, we as creatives, the human part needs to come in and look at it and inject a little bit of that magic as well. It's very hard for me to see how that will work in the end. I can only kind of like speak about my own experiences and when things got a little bit stale with design work in general, and then you look at a painting, or you watch a movie, or you listen to music, all those things that make us who we are, all those things that connect with us here in the heart. And I think that's where the collaboration and the partnership will be better. The logic and that magic definitely needs to merge together. I don't know if it answers your question, Tim.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, and I also thought the video you shared about the writers was a good example of that, right? Because it didn't create the same story. I don't think was the idea they were getting across, but it inspired maybe something new. So I think I'll be remembering that video. And then lastly, there's a question about I guess your work at Takeaway or maybe other experiences that you've had. Have you started being partnered on the design team with data scientists or AI specialists or folks that are coming from that side? And then it was actually another video that you showed where I think it was a designer and an engineer that were kind of paired up together.
Yeah.
So has that started to happen in the workplace?
I think it depends on what industry you kind of like working in. You know, obviously there are scales in terms of like, you know, where people have like earlier adoption rate to things. But I don't see why it wouldn't happen. You know, I certainly see, you know, in the instance of how AI can improve the user experience in design. I certainly can see that. You know, if you what was this Project Phoenix? I don't know if you guys sorry, Project Phoebe. I don't know if you guys are aware of it. But Project Phoenix, Phoebe is busy with this thing called mutative design, and basically with mutative design, the interface and the user experiences changes instantaneously based on the feedback that you give the user. So for example, you know, an example that I saw was when I'm on my phone and I'm in a dark room, all of a sudden the interface or the UI changes to make the colors brighter, to make it more visible for me to see. It'll change colors based on preferences. So it's all of these things are definitely going to. What I'm seeing is all this big convergence of all these different tech, and some of it is going to work and some of it is not. But certainly what I've seen so far. It's definitely has me looking pretty optimistic and hopeful for the future of design.
Fantastic, awesome, thank you. And you know, one comment I'll add, and maybe a bit of a suggestion or insight for the group, is that what I've seen to answer that last question is that designers or other disciplines get paired with, we'll call it them AI specialists, usually when they're midway through a project or to solve a very specific kind of problem. And so they get brought in, can you help us with this? We're stuck. And that can be effective. But I think for us to see big change in this area, we're going to have to invest in pairing these types of folks together a little bit sooner, even when we're not sure if it's going to be the right pairing to solve the problem, right? So some of the creative work can get done together versus just throwing a problem.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I think that can be troubling, and we'll know from different design specialists, if you're just the fixer of other people's messes, that can get tiring a little bit quickly. So
exactly.
maybe folks could look at that. But this brings us to the end. So I want to thank you, Siraaj, and thank you, Jamie, so much for giving these presentations today. As always, the recordings will be made available later in the week. So people can go back and view some of the assets that you've shared or ideas that you've shared. I will be, like I said, looking into some technology to help us maybe collaborate a little bit more in the next edition. We'll do another one before we kind of have our holiday break at the end of the year. So I'll be talking to everybody on the Meetup page. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Siraaj, and good night.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Jamie. Bye-bye. See you, Brendan.